Hey everyone, thanks so much. I wanted to quickly introduce, and unfortunately I do not see her in here, but we have a woman that is with EVN who is our official photographer named Ellie, so you will see her around. She's a lovely blonde woman that's been kind of crawling under tables and all over the place. But I also did want to just take 1 second to talk about a comment that has come up from a couple of different people here where they said that they felt like they were in a particular profession and they felt like they were in the minority. And I think a lot of us here kind of feel that way because we have such a diverse crowd. So I just wanted to see if we could kind of get, see who all was here from various different backgrounds. So we've got a lot of academics. If you're an academic, raise your hand. Wow. What about lawyers? So, very small crowd. Election or government officials? All right. On the panel, very well covered. Thank you. Do we have anybody with issue advocacy organizations? Maurice, come on. And independent advocates. Great. Anyone else? Am I missing anything? Did we cover everything? Musicians? Yeah. Oh, voter services. Okay.
Yep.
Non-academic cybersecurity experts.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else? Data scientists? Thank you. Yes. Journalists. Thank you. Yes. Anyone else? Oh, funders. Yay! Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I am really excited about this next panel. And Mark is going to get everything kicked off. I'm going to be listening to every word.
She has to. That's. Hi, y'all. My name is Mark, and I work on tabulation audits. More specifically, as you may have gleaned by now, I'm Mark Lindeman. I'm Senior Science and Technology Policy Officer at Verified Voting, and I work with some of the most wonderful people in the world, including most of the people on this panel, because it turns out there's just something about tabulation audits that brings together people in interesting, crazy ways to solve all kinds of problems that we couldn't solve on our own. So that's what keeps me coming and keeps me going. And my job right now is to get off the stage pretty much as quickly as possible. I just want to make a couple of comments. One is to echo something that Commissioner Palmer said earlier, specifically in this context. This is not a partisan area at all, which is another thing that keeps me coming and keeps me going. When I work with election officials, I almost never know and don't try to guess what their party affiliation, if any, is. And that's a story when I'm talking to ordinary citizens. I want them to know, hey, you might be surprised. I don't know what you imagine. These are people who get up in the morning trying to figure out how they're going to make things work for voters. And that's the story I think we all want to be telling. And I actually see audits as one way of helping us all tell that story. The other thing, just so Brenda isn't in the position of having to say anything about risk-limiting audits, I am co-author of the somewhat unfortunately titled Gentle Introduction to Risk-Limiting Audits. It's gentle for certain audiences. I apologize. I'm so sorry. No, I completely derailed myself. Actually, what Tina said yesterday, and Tina, of course, should be on this panel too, was spot on. So the basic idea behind risk-limiting audits is we want to look at enough of the voted ballots to have strong evidence that the reported winner actually won. Or if, heaven forbid, the reported winner didn't actually get more votes according to the ballots, we want to find that out so we can examine all the ballots and get the right answer. So we're trying to build public confidence by producing transparent evidence that the outcome is correct, or if we want to produce resilience in the event that something went terribly wrong with the tabulation for any reason whatsoever. So that's the setup. One of our speakers is not talking about a risk-limiting audit, but nonetheless, it definitely counts as a milestone this year. This panel should have been a 3-hour panel, but I love you anyway. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I'm sorry. Let me introduce these people. In somewhat random order, Brenda Cabrera is General Registrar and Election Director in the City of Fairfax, Virginia. I was able to get her to come because she didn't have to come very far. She spent a lot of time road tripping. I don't think she anticipated this. Miguel Nunez is Deputy Director at the Rhode Island Board of Elections, and a pleasure to work with. Karen McKim is Coordinator of Wisconsin Election Integrity, and Ron Rivest is Institute Professor at MIT, which I think is like Bodhisattva. I mean, this is... Without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Brenda. Brenda, I encourage you to stand, but you don't have to. It's up to you. I told everyone else.
Being the rebel that I am, I think I will sit. Sorry. First of all, let me thank you all for coming back after lunch, and also for having me here. This is really an honor. I will say that this is something I knew nothing about a year ago, or probably less than a year ago. So this is a new field for me. Originally, I said no, and then look where we are today. One of the things that I wanted to know, and if you're afraid of falling asleep, maybe I'll ask you to stand, is how many of you in here feel like you understand the math of a risk-limiting audit and could also explain it? Could you stand up? Stand up. Stand up.
Yeah, okay. Do we remain standing?
No, go ahead and sit down. Okay, so then how many of you didn't know what an RLA was much before this conference, or much before probably we'll say the last 3, 4, 5 months?
If you would
stand. Go ahead and stand. Okay, thank you. So this is my way of illustrating the spectrum here, and since you all are the brain trust in this room, I would imagine that we could agree that spectrum is much broader or more heavily weighted towards the I don't know what this is group in the public eye. So and when my no, I don't want help. Just to give you a little idea of where I come from, I'm the city of Fairfax, not the county of Fairfax. I have a population of just under 24,000, and I have 16,000 voters. To provide my credibility, which I somehow feel the need to do, before I went to the city of Fairfax, I was in Prince William County, which is about 280+ thousand voters, and is the second largest in Virginia. Fairfax County is the largest at 700,000. So you can see between number 1 and number 2 in Virginia, we have a great disparity. But I say that because I do have an eye towards scalability with these things, and it does give me a unique perspective sometimes in Virginia, being able to see how things work in a small locality and then how we can scale those up into a larger locality. So a couple things that I want to focus on is confidence, collaboration, and communication or messaging. And I'm not going to go into like the details really of what we did in our RLA, but I think you'll be able to extrapolate some of those things out. So the most encouraging thing that came out of a conference at MIT back in December was when Colorado got up and spent some time talking about their process of getting the legislation they wanted, getting the process they wanted, and so forth. Because we all know that Colorado is held as a standard for implementing risk-limiting audits. But what was so encouraging to me was it took them 10+ years to get to that point. And I think that that's a story that needs to be told as an encouragement to those of us who are being told, hey, we want you to do risk-limiting audits. In Virginia, we have this code section, and I'll just read part of it for you because I can't do it justice without reading it. The Department of Elections shall coordinate a post-election risk-limiting audit annually of ballot scanner machines in use in the Commonwealth. The localities selected for the audit shall be chosen at random, and every locality participating in the department's annual audit at least once during a 5-year period. The purpose of the audits shall be to study the accuracy of the ballot scanner machines. So if you know what RLAs are, and it goes on to be worse, but or at least inconsistent with what an RLA really is supposed to be. So when we started our audit in Fairfax, which we did last August, we went from May to being, I believe it was May, hey, can you do an audit? There may have been some negotiation in that period between no and yes. And then we actually did our audit in the first part of August. So I've since found out that that's really a very short period of time to stand up an audit. At the time, we didn't know better, so it was fine. But at that time, this bill was in, or this law was in serious jeopardy of being completely repealed in the state of Virginia, because apparently the writer of this, the sponsor of this, originally imagined rescanning ballots on the same machines that you used on Election Day. That was his idea of what this risk limiting audit was supposed to be. I don't know where they came up with the idea of risk limiting. I think this just sounds good. Why wouldn't we want to limit risk? So we'll put that word in there, not really understanding that there was an equation and math involved in actually pulling that off. So election officials at my level, very local, I think there is a sense sometimes where we are being asked to do things without being consulted about what it is that you want us to do. To use sort of a cliche, sometimes we can feel a little put upon, right? We had to change to DREs. You don't like our voting equipment anymore, so we're changing to DREs. Guess what? Now you don't like DREs, so we got to go back to paper. And so there's this feeling, having gone through some of those things, that there's always going to be something around the corner that you're going to want us to implement, but you haven't really asked us how to do it. So I think that collaboration is really important in this. And to steal a little bit of what Tina said yesterday, it's important to understand who we all are in this space and to really respect what we bring to that table. And sometimes I can't, if I'm working with an organization, I can't necessarily give you 100% all-out credit and stand up and cheer you, because maybe some of the things that you support look partisan to the rest of the world, and I can't do that. So if you want to help us in this area and want to be nonpartisan about it, then I think we welcome you to do that. But sometimes there is this tension, and this historical tension between advocacy groups and the people that are actually on the ground. So I think that collaboration really has a place for that. I was thinking yesterday when I was coming in on the subway that there's a lot of people here and a lot of people who want audits, but there's a whole lot fewer people who can actually implement them and do them. Like we're the ones that have to do this, and that was just sort of an interesting thought. So the other thing is that election officials, just so you know, we are process oriented. Right? So a lot of this is kind of theory, and yay, RLAs are a good thing. But what I want to know is, how many paper clips do I need? Right? The people that are laughing are the election officials, right? And I am capable, and this is what I'm going to do with anything that you give me to do. I am going to dissect it and reduce it to a checklist. Right? That's what I do. How many paper clips do I need? And how do I reduce this to a checklist? That's what people care about. So I give that to you as sort of a peek behind the screen of what we're about, and encourage you to maybe approach on that level as well. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is messaging or communication. There are different people who need to be communicated with. Legislators need to be communicated with this. Going back to, it was about to be repealed, there were no legislation initiatives in the last Virginia General Assembly to actually repeal the audit law. So I know people don't like it. I know it doesn't have the value that we want it to have, but it does give us time to play with audits and get our processes down, figure out how RLAs work in Virginia, and then I imagine that we will go back to the legislature and say, you know, this is what we want to do. It's post-election certification, which is another problem with it in terms of being a true RLA. So there's some things we need to clean up, but in the meantime, we need to keep moving and encouraging Virginia to do that. So messaging, we have legislators. We also have messaging among our colleagues. The best way for that to work is for that to be peer-to-peer. So one of the things that Tina and I talk about is we, as advocates, are responsible for communicating with our peers, and there's nothing stronger than my standing up in Virginia and saying, hey, RLAs are a good thing, they're the right thing, and we need to do this. And then there's communicating with voters. I don't think this is as challenging, I think, as some people do, because my bank does audits, and I don't go in and ask them, show me how you do your audit. What method? Do you use the Bayesian audit in order to do your bank audits? So for me, it's enough to know that I go to a bank, my money is in a bank where they do audits. And so I think there are a lot of voters who that will satisfy them. You know, we do post-election risk-limiting audits, and they'll be like, yeah, you know, I can show you what we do and why you should be comfortable with that. So my final thought is we need to work collaboratively to communicate through our actions, including risk-limiting audits as a tool, to restore the confidence in our elections. That's what we need to be doing.
In the essence of saving time, I'm going to stay right where I am, Mark, because I'll need every second of my allotted time to give you a crash course in how Rhode Island got to where we were in the last 18 months or so. So my name is Miguel Nunez. I'm with the Rhode Island Board of Elections. And just to give you a brief synopsis of Rhode Island, we're a little bit unique because we run all of our elections centrally by the state. We use the DS200 AutoMark. We use the AutoMark as the ballot marking device in every location. We have one of those in addition to the AutoMark. In addition to the DS200. We have 461 precincts. We use paper ballots. And we also use electronic poll books statewide. So we're a small state. We have a small staff. We have even less of an impact on national elections given our small vote totals. But we like to take on big projects. In 2016, we deployed all new voting equipment to the DS200 statewide. In 2018, we deployed electronic poll books statewide, about 1,600 of them throughout the state. And now RLAs is the next item on our agenda. This all started in 2017. Common Cause Rhode Island approached us to talk about supporting legislation that would require RLAs in our state. And this would happen before the certification, after the presidential primary in 2020, and also after the general election in 2020. My 7-member board, it was a bipartisan board, voted unanimously to support that legislation. And it passed the General Assembly in October of 2017. The governor signed it into law. Now, why did we support this? Basically, there was a few reasons for this. First, we had no audits in Rhode Island. We had no formal systems of audits in Rhode Island before or after certification. So obviously that was a problem. Workload. The percentage-based audits are popular in New England. Most of our neighboring states, as Connecticut and Massachusetts, do a percentage-based audit. And we saw that the workload of those could be similar, to what a risk limiting audit could provide. But the results of a percentage-based audit aren't very useful outside of the precincts that were actually audited. So that's why we weren't too interested in the percentage-based. And awareness, obviously there was increased awareness by election officials and voters about potential meddling in the election after 2016 by foreign or even domestic actors. And also we wanted to find non-malicious errors, because not every error or effect in an election results is caused by maliciousness. It could be caused by errors either on the ballot or in the programming of the machines that we wanted to determine if there were any in any of our future elections. And we had several hurdles to do all of this. First of all, we had zero experience in RLAs. If you would have talked to me before 18 months ago, I probably would have told you, I couldn't tell you if a batch comparison audit was comparing chocolate chip cookies and coconut cookies or what, because I had no idea what an RLA was. Our equipment, our DS200 scrambles the cast vote record. In ballots are not imprinted with a unique number at our precincts. Voting in Rhode Island is 90% done at the precinct and 10% done by mail. We had no software to conduct an RLA. We had no staff member with the level of technical knowledge to establish the protocols to conduct one. And none of our local election officials in our 39 municipalities had any familiarity with RLAs. So it wasn't looking too good 18 months ago. So here's the steps that we took. First, we sent our staff to observe and participate where RLAs were already being used. We knew that RLAs were used in the state of California going back to the 80s in certain jurisdictions there. We knew that Colorado was at the forefront. I guess they're considered the mecca of RLAs at this point, where everyone goes to learn RLAs. So myself and my executive director, we traveled out to Arapahoe County. We sent staff out to Denver County. We also went to Kalamazoo, Michigan to observe. We got software. We partnered with a local professor, Suzanne Mello-Stark, who worked in Rhode Island, but at the time was working full-time as a professor at Worcester Polytechnical Institute. She had two graduate students build a prototype for us, and that prototype became important later on. Protocol. We sought out a lot of help, and a lot of these people are in this room here today. We formed a working group, which we call the RLA group, in the summer of 2018. That group consisted of a Common Cause Rhode Island Executive Director John Marion. We had Professor Ron Rivest here, who I met back with John Marion 18 months ago to give us a crash course in RLAs and some of the complexities of it. I still remember that to this day. And his former grad student, Mary Sridhar of MIT, who continued the important work on the software development. And verified voting was instrumental. Mark Lindeman, who has a unique skill of explaining RLAs in a gentle and soft way. Mark?
I love you.
And John McCarthy, who's sitting back there, who has a knack for organizing a conference call, a meeting, even as something as complex as RLAs, and getting you motivated to get to it. I think at some point we had up to 20 people almost on a conference call. These were folks from other states, from other jurisdictions that just wanted to listen into the call and see what we were working on. And we had the Brennan Center of Justice, Liz Howard, Wilfred Coddington, Jerome Lovato of EAC, Democracy Fund, Colorado Secretary of State, Arapahoe County, and we had independent activists like Lynn Garland and Luther Weeks, who were all interested in seeing RLA succeed in Rhode Island and putting their own time to get it done. And we also included local election officials, Bristol, Portsmouth, Cranston, Rhode Island, to be part of this process. And then we planned a pilot. We were excited to put everything that we were working on into practice. In January of 2019, we decided we were going to test three RLA audit types. 18,000 ballots would be involved in those three communities from those local jurisdictions. We wanted to put in a couple of contests that would be interesting to be part of the audit. We audited governor, and we audited state question number 2. Our goal was to test as many types of RLAs and procedures as we could. We wanted to get timing data to see how all of this looked so it could be scaled up statewide. We wanted to make it as public and observable as possible, and we wanted to get people's feedback from our staff and people in attendance. We tested 3 types of audits: batch comparison audit, that was about 900 ballots. We tested the stacking and sorting and hash marking methods of that. We did a ballot polling audit, which was about 8,000 ballots. We tested different ballot sample retrieval methods, the scale method, ruler method, counting method, and the K-cut method. And we rescanned all these ballots in order to facilitate putting them into batches. And then finally, the more complex audit that we did was the ballot level comparison audit, which was about 9,000 ballots. We rescanned all of those ballots through our high-speed DS-850 in order to get a cast vote record, because remember, our cast vote record on Election Day is scrambled, and the ballots are not imprinted. So we didn't print the ballots that day, and we rescanned them. And that in itself was a learning process because it took about 4 hours, and we got a lot of experience on how to create that ballot manifest and the timing data to do that. And we selected these contests because they had the precinct sizes in these communities that represented an ideal fit for what we wanted to do in our pilot. And we learned a lot. We learned a lot. We learned about procedures. We learned about do's and don'ts. We learned that you really should have a lot more lighting in a warehouse to do some of the things that we wanted to do. And I think it was very important for us to hear from people that were there that it was an experience that they saw, that they were able to observe, get up close. We didn't want to restrict people from seeing everything that was being done. We had 135 people in attendance there, and we wanted to have people be part of this and give us their feedback so we could learn as much as we could from this. Our next steps are to decide on what RLA type best fits our state. And we want to conduct at least one additional pilot in order to get more information when we do decide that. But my suggestion to all of you that are conducting RLAs is first and foremost, go out there and get some help, because there are plenty of people out there that are interested in election security. They're interested in helping election officials to do this. And when you get that all together, then I suggest you test pilot until you feel comfortable in doing it officially. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Karen McKim with Wisconsin Election Integrity, and I guess after these two, I have to admit, I've been pushing RLAs in Wisconsin since about 2013, and Wisconsin still doesn't have them, so I quit.
No!
I'm impressed that they came up to speed so fast. Okay, it's the second one.
The second one?
Yeah. That one.
I think it was up.
All right, there you are.
Okay. Okay. I didn't mean to be so negative. At first, I thought it would make you laugh. In 2018, Wisconsin really did move the needle. We really did. The Wisconsin Election Commission went from ordering 3% flat percentage voting machine audits after certification to ordering 5% flat percentage voting machine audits before certification, and that's good. That's really good. And yeah, clap for Wisconsin Election Commission. I'm an auditor by instinct and by training, so I can't stand up here and just tell you, oh, everything's great in Wisconsin, and you wouldn't believe me if I did. So Wisconsin is still a long way from our first certified, accurate election results, routinely certified. Again, I want to credit the Wisconsin Elections Commission. We pushed them for years to be sure, but it was their decision, and it was a decision the commission made in the face of some headwinds. Let's see, how do I advance this? Yeah, okay. You've heard Wisconsin is decentralized. The Wisconsin Elections Commission has practically zero authority over canvass procedures, and this is a map of the 72 little secretaries of state that do control the canvass procedures in Wisconsin. And so the Election Commission, well, I'll get to it later, but basically they had no clear statutory authority to mandate these voting machine audits during the canvass. The second thing is the Wisconsin legislature is aggressively partisan and had no discernible support or interest in election auditing. The Elections Commission had no appropriations specifically for expanding audits. The Elections Commission was receiving no interest or even comprehension from the press that I could discern. And the local election officials were grumbling at best about the idea of adding voting machine audits to their canvas. Despite all this, the Elections Commission decided to do the right thing anyway. You see earlier that they got a Cleary Award, but that was for their work with the voter registration system. Now, I'm going to tell you this good work they did with about the tabulation system. Okay, the details. I was talking to Brenda last night. She read me the whole Virginia statute, and I mean, it's kind of a satire in a way. But I hope you, anyway.
I know you said it in a loving way.
Yes. Virginia's for lovers, right? Can we get down? Yeah, okay. This is the Wisconsin statute in its entirety. It's a little bit paraphrased, but not much. That the Wisconsin Elections Commission relied on to give themselves authority to mandate these these voting machine audits during the canvass. Now, you're a discerning audience. You can see that this isn't perfect for election audits. But both with Virginia and Wisconsin, I think the idea is, even if you have a really flawed law having to do with verifying election results, if you've got willing, responsible election officials who are willing to work with it, they can find ways to use even sort of silly statutory authority to harvest some decent election security results. Now, for instance, notice that this statute says nothing about when the Elections Commission can order these voting machine audits. They used to order them after certification, and although this statute doesn't say you can add something to the canvass process, it doesn't say they can't make the deadline before certification, so they did. You'll also notice this doesn't say how many voting machines have to be audited, so they went with 5%. You can see a limitation in this, however. The Elections Commission only has this authority once every 2 years, and to get any more elections audited than that, we're going to have to work with those 72 little secretaries of state, but 2 years, once every 2 years is again better than nothing. There's no requirement for expansion, and it's not binding on the results. So there's limitations. But aside from this, I want to point out two other sort of conceptual ideas that I think we can learn from the Wisconsin experience. The first is the importance of having a clear purpose that makes sense considering the risks before you start to audit. As someone with professional auditing experience, I get so frustrated. All these, you always hear, we're going to do audits, we're going to audit. Well, what questions are you going to answer? What purpose does your audit serve? Now, if you do a real risk-limiting audit, your purpose is clear. You're going to confirm that you've identified the right winner. And the purpose of the audit basically dictates the methods you use and the criteria you apply to say, okay, we've got it. Now, the Wisconsin audits clearly do not answer the question, have we identified the right winner? This statute was adopted in 2006, and the intent behind it was kind of to answer the question, is each voting system used in this state still capable of counting votes accurately as it was capable when we first certified it? Now, the risk that an entire system is going to lose its ability to count accurately is not a very big risk. Individual machines might, wear out or get dirty or be abused, but an entire system is not going to lose its ability to count votes accurately. That risk is remote. But designing an audit process to answer that question then kind of undermines its ability to safeguard against the real risks that you really do face. And let me give you a specific example how this works out. Notice that standard there is 1 in 500,000 votes is the error rate that it dictates. Stop laughing. You might recognize that as the 2002 federal certification standard for brand new machines that were being tested in a laboratory setting with perfectly marked test decks. And, then maybe they could achieve 1 in 500,000. But for the voting machines that are selected for these Wisconsin audits, there is no chance that any of them are ever going to meet that error rate. For one thing, they're going to have, 300, 500 ballots cast. And so for that small number, there's no voting machine in Wisconsin that counts 500,000 ballots in one election. There's not enough ballots. Functionally, it's requiring perfection. The second thing, of course, is the ballots that are used in these audits are marked by real human beings who have a tendency to use their mail-in ballots as coffee cup coasters. You've all seen it. Don't say you haven't. So to avoid, and notice, if it doesn't achieve this perfection standard, the commission is required to investigate and maybe remediate. And so to avoid having to investigate and demand remedial action every time a voting machine gets confused by a coffee stain, the commission has defined error into oblivion in the instructions for these audits. The auditors are instructed to record errors only when the error is a result of machine malfunction. They are instructed specifically and energetically to ignore voter intent, and if they see any discrepancies between the hand count and the machine count, they are instructed to ignore them if they can be attributed to human error or human intervention. And so they cannot do that, for one thing. They are humans. And every audit that's conducted under these instructions results in a struggle to make sure they get it right, that they've ignored voter intent. And worse, this extremely narrow definition of error can allow these audits to miss systematic error for years. And there's a specific example of that. In the first 8 years these audits were conducted, up to the 2016 audits, the Optech Eagles were miscounting lots of votes. You know that the Optech Eagles can only count ink if it has carbon in it. And you know that the number of mail-in and absentee ballots has been increasing. And you may or may not know that poll workers are capable of teaching each other that if they push that override button on the back of the machine, they can get the machine to take the ballot even if it wants to spit it out. And so there's every reason to believe that the number of absentee and mail-in votes that were ignored was just increasing over the years. And because the auditors were instructed to ignore voter intent, they had no way to document and measure that increase over the years, and election officials were functionally unaware of it in any official way. It was caught in the 2016 audits, and the machine was decertified in Wisconsin. But that problem was because the audits, the specific purpose of the audits was this narrow thing that required the audits to ignore a big problem. The second concept I want to stress today for your consideration is that the purpose of tabulation audits is twofold, and these are both legitimate purposes. One is to ensure accuracy, and the other is to improve voter confidence. And I want to present you with the idea that RLAs are designed to achieve that first purpose of ensuring accuracy, but they aren't the best way to achieve that second purpose, voter confidence. And I've seen plenty of these voting machine audits in Wisconsin, and I can tell you that when they're done, the public observers and the poll workers that volunteered go out of there with a smile on their face. It observably increases voter confidence because they can see that the hand count matched a real poll tape. And it may not be the most rational thing in the world. I mean, I would love it if they were all confident with RLAs, but it takes the voting machine audits. And I also want to give you some of my own experience quickly. From late 2014 through early 2016, our group did demonstration RLAs in Dane County. For 5 consecutive elections, we confirmed the results in several county-wide races. They weren't valid audits. We had to use the digital ballot images because we didn't have the money to get access to the paper ballots. We used Phil Stark's online tools for risk limiting auditing, but we did do public demonstrations. And we tried to do them as publicly as we could. Like we rented church basement right off the square in Madison during the farmers market and put out signs and had people going outside saying, come in and see how election auditing works. And so we did a lot of risk limiting audits. And I could tell you that we did get to the point where we could literally describe the risk limiting audit to people who literally walked in off the street. And and have them say, oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah, this is a good idea. We should do this. But I can also tell you that that was kind of an intellectual response on their part. And when we switched over to doing a single precincts, that's when you could see the light in their eyes come on and the confidence in the election results. And I got to tell you about one in particular. There was one election where the RLAs are so efficient that we completed them in the morning, and we had rented the room for the whole day. And so we said, what are we going to do in the afternoon? And they said, well, so, some of these public observers, we're just going to ask them, you pick a precinct. What do you want us to audit? We'll count a whole precinct. And one gentleman walked in, and he was just sitting there quietly, and we said, who wants to nominate a precinct to be verified? And he said, I voted in City of Madison Ward, I'll say 16. And he said, when I went to vote on election day, they told me the op scan was broken. And I had to mark my paper ballot and put it in this slot down below where it wouldn't get counted until later in that day. And he said, I did it, but, I didn't like it. This made me real nervous. And so would you please hand count or manually count Ward 16? And so we said, sure. And we pulled out the digital ballot images and audited them. And we explained to him that we were confident that the election officials made sure the number of voters marked off on the poll book matched the number of ballots the machine processed. Okay. And but it matched, and he came into that room a nervous voter and left a confident one. And so if I was goddess of elections, I would do RLAs during the canvass to answer that important, urgent question, are we identifying the right winner? And then between elections, I would be doing the voting machine audits for the purpose of voter confidence. So again, before I wrap up, I just want to repeat again, the Wisconsin Election Commission is doing excellent work at the staff, especially in educating themselves on RLA and getting Wisconsin ready to move from what we're doing to real RLAs. And again, thank you.
So I'm not an election official. I teach at MIT. I wish I could come here and report to you that Massachusetts was doing post-election audits. We're not there yet. We're playing catch-up with our neighboring states and trying to eventually get there, I suppose. So I've participated in some of these post-election audits, and I'd like to give a few comments and look ahead. I'll make my remarks brief. First of all, I want to give my tremendous congratulations to everybody who's participated in these. These have been wonderful events. Everybody's really worked together very nicely. It's wonderful seeing a community like this get its act together and say, we can do this and we can do it quickly. We can do it under tight time deadlines and get it done well. So congratulations to everybody involved in them. It's just been wonderful to see. As I said, I'm an academic. I tend to be a big picture kind of guy, so maybe I can make a few remarks of those sorts. The title of this panel, I don't know who chose it. Maybe you did, Mark. Milestones in Post-Election Audits is a great one. We're on a journey together, and we need to measure our progress, but look ahead to where we're going as well. And I think there's quite a journey ahead that we need to think about. I've spent time with various kinds of technology and like cryptography and so on, and seeing technology move out of academia into the real world. And it's a process, and you have to think about what are the steps in that process and how do you get from here to there and have some idea where there is. Eventually, I think we'd like to have post-election audits all across the country for every contest. We're just getting started on the path. We've gone through milestone 1, and we have to think about, where are we now, and what are the next steps that we need to take. I think one of the things that disturbed me about it earlier was this talk about national popular vote. I just have to get that off my chest. I worry about people talking about we want to have national popular votes. When I hear that, I think, how are we going to audit that? And I don't think we have an answer to that question yet. And so I think that while the idea of national popular vote is very attractive, the mechanics of doing it well and doing it securely worry me. So anyway, I'll put that aside. But that's maybe at the end of a different road or a longer road, or we can get there eventually. But and I can talk to you more about like that if you want. So we're on this journey, and we're starting off, and we've done some post-election audits in Colorado. We've had some pilots in a number of places, and you know, where are we now? What are the next steps going to be like? And I think, you know, one of the things I like to talk to people about in terms of levels is there's this wonderful Wikipedia page called Technology Readiness Levels, and you can measure how technology gets out there. You know, there's academic ideas, there's software prototypes, and there's initial deployments and testing, and then you roll it out. And that's exactly the process we're in. We're trying to get this technology of post-election audits out and used widely, and we need to see what the next steps are. For example, software development, right? We need software to support the post-election audits. We're not there yet. There's a number of people thinking about that, and we need to have software. But the software that was used in these post-election audits is not scalable enough. It's not robust enough to be used yet for wide-scale deployment. We need to have some process for developing and producing software that will be used in post-election audits widely. We'll get there, but we have to identify that as a goal, and we have to figure out exactly what properties that needs to have, how we're going to sustain that software and maintain it, and so on. But you know, that's part of it. And I worry, as Brenda said this already, you know, I worry that the demand for post-election audit technology, including software and people and expertise and experience, will exceed the supply that we have. This is a small community. I mean, in a few years, a conference like this maybe should be 3 times as big, you know, with people that have seen and participated in post-election audits. We have to think about scaling up our community as well, because it's people resources as well. So software, people, and the math is another thing too. We've got a lot of different variations on how we want to audit and what we want to do. We've seen this already. Rhode Island was a wonderful example of testing out a number of different ideas. I loved all the experimentation that was done, particularly on the sampling ideas. We had, as Miguel said, we had K-cut, and we had the ruler method, and we had the weighing method, which worked well, and also there was counting, I guess was the fourth one. And we compared them against each other. And so I think we're still at the early stages where we're testing out some of these ideas, playing them against each other. Some of this will settle down, we'll converge upon what are the best processes and so on too. And there's other things that we are still developing the math for, in the middle of doing some experiments on auditing ranked choice voting, which is an area where we have very little experience and not a lot of theory yet, and we need to figure out how to do that. If we're going to have ranked choice voting in some elections, as Maine does, and I've been working with Deb McDonough there about that, how are we going to audit these things? And there's the whole Bayesian, non-Bayesian thing too, which is fun to play with, and we don't need to get into that today. And there's other variations like managing the variability that you get with ballot polling audits. How do we think about some of the statistics and how to maybe make it work a little better. So we're at the early days in terms of getting the community together, getting the software together, getting the math worked out in the best possible way, getting the sampling techniques worked out. And it's an interesting journey that we're all on together. And I think we need to continue to work together to explore these alternatives, to document what we're doing carefully, to share, to observe each other doing these things, and to look towards the ultimate goal, which I think is just doing post-election audits everywhere, and we'll get there. But if we can, I don't know how far we'll get by 2020. Hopefully, quite far. I hope we'll all be working hard over the next few months to get 2020 audited pretty well. But even beyond that, we're going to be proceeding. So that's sort of a big picture perspective. I hope you find that useful. Thanks.
Before I turn it over to you, I just am exercising prerogative to say a few quick things, and then I'll invite, if anyone on the panel has something burning they want to say, but I'll allow that, and then we'll turn it over to you. So one thing I just wanted to mention, having been involved in the Fairfax pilot, I hope Brenda would agree that it was a pretty fabulous example of collaboration in that the city was all in, the State Department of Elections was all in, a couple of people at Verified Voting were all in, and Liz Howard sort of got it all started. So And somehow we found our lanes and we figured out, where we had to cooperate, what we had to do together and what we could just do and merge. And it was fabulous. And that's how we did it in basically about 7 weeks, which kind of segues to my other point. You might be wondering, so I heard that an RLA, you might be able to pull it off in 7 weeks, or it might take 18 months, or it might take 10 years. And are they talking about the same thing? Well, no, actually, not really, right? If you're asking how long does it take to implement RLAs, or how do voters feel about RLAs or so forth, it's sort of like asking, how long does it take to use blue paint? To do what? Okay, being risk limiting is just one property that a post-election tabulation audit may have. And even then, I have to, well, what risk am I limiting? So just knowing that risk limiting is just one little slice of the audit picture might help you make sense out of some of the questions you have, which are the right questions to have. And it might also help you make sense out of why Wisconsin absolutely belongs in this picture, because the move from post-certification to pre-certification is as huge a milestone as anything that's happening in RLAs. And I wish everything, yeah. By the way, Karen, I really like your idea, but I'm going to shut up now. So I want to keep short, but if you want to blurt anything in reaction to something someone else said.
I will be short. I didn't do a good job of thanking the collaborators that came to the city. So I would take Miguel's list almost verbatim and square that, because that's a mathematical thing that you do. But also just that these things are incremental. And, like with the Virginia law, we will see incremental change. And I think it was Commissioner Hicks this morning who said we don't have change without dialogue. And that also applies in this arena as well. And I know we all want it, and we want it yesterday, but we have to have incremental and be happy and celebrate really those incremental changes that come about.
I'm curious about how Kim explains RLAs to the guy off the street quickly.
I was afraid someone was going to put me on the spot like that. Okay. Well, first of all, I make sure they understand the purpose of an RLA. I make sure they are not confusing it with a recount. I said the purpose is not to verify that Paul Soglin received, 430, that Paul Soglin received 57,000 votes and, whatever. The purpose is just to verify that Paul Soglin was the right winner. That's it, nothing more. And then I make sure they understand the concept of sampling, that you have to randomly sample across, and most people actually do. And then I say, okay, what you do is you sample the ballots. You have to make sure it's random across the all, and then you look at to see what percentage Paul Soglin got in this little sample, and you compare it to the percentage Paul Soglin got in the whole thing. And if it's close enough, then you can be pretty confident that your sample reflects the whole thing. And if it's not close enough, and that's what these formulas tell you, then you might have gotten a bad sample, or you might know that Paul didn't win. So you pick a bigger sample, and you pick a bigger sample, until you either get confidence that Paul really did win the election, or you find out who really did. Does that work?
And maybe I'm wrong, but I think the next milestone we have to hit sometime is the state actually doing a risk limit audit of a statewide election. And then maybe after that another milestone, we can't control it, is a major expansion of a statewide office. And then maybe it's one where it actually discovers a big problem and where we have to do a full recount. I don't want to force those last couple, but that's what we're up to now. Because when we got to sell it someplace in another state, we got to be able to say, hey, it's actually, the whole job has been done somewhere.
I think in Virginia, one of the things we have to do before we even get to a full statewide is in the city of Fairfax, we did an audit as if the race was contained within the city of Fairfax, which it was not. It was a statewide election. And we don't have that many elections in our city that are fully contained in the city. So my next goal is to take a congressional district that we share with 2 districts and try and do that. I'm the David of the Goliaths in that because it'll be Fairfax County and Prince William and the city of Fairfax. But that's my goal, and I'm hoping that we can collaborate on that going forward as well.
Miguel, you said that Rhode Island has tried a variety of different audit strategies, comparison or ballot polling, and you all have a tremendous amount of sort of live experience running RLAs. Are there any efforts right now to collect that information and make it publicly available so that other people in other states can learn about it, or so that we can figure out, what are the challenges that maybe we can solve with the math or whatever?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question, because we are, as a group, working on a report of the entire pilot to see how it went in all aspects, whether it was the preparation leading up to it, to the actual day and the actual results of the RLA. So we do plan on, within the next month or so, getting a report out there and making it public to everyone.
So for those of you doing ballot comparison audits, I'd like to get a sense of whether or not you're releasing full sets of cast vote records, or how you're dealing with the potential of the full transparency issue.
That's actually a discussion I had with Mark yesterday, and it's a balance there that we're having continuing discussions on. Because obviously, we need to take steps to prevent any voter privacy issues from being exposed, but we also want to be as public as possible with the results, because we realize how useful and how much of an interest this is to the public.
Just one point of fact for the pilot, basically the CVRs for the statewide contests are complete. That those, unless someone foresaw that they would have a chance to sell their votes, we think that's pretty secure. Whereas if we had gotten into the local contests, we would have been more nervous.
Okay. And others, are you doing?
So in the city, we did a ballot comparison and a ballot polling audit, and unfortunately, since then, the state has not really made any further progress in terms of what we will be doing going forward. We did ours in August, and then we had an election, which we have these jobs we have to do associated with that. And then we had legislative session in Virginia. So the gentleman who's largely involved in audits at the state level was also involved in the legislative session. And then the secondary person, I just learned, apparently can get more money working somewhere besides the state, so he has left. So as quickly as we stood it up, we haven't made a whole lot of progress since then. So all that to say, those are the kinds of decisions that I think Virginia will have to make if we can actually do ballot comparison audits. We would have to do them as transitive audits. We would have to rescan because we are completely precinct-based and our CVRs are scrambled at the polling place level.
So in the ones you did you release the CVRs?
How
it was
much
one
of
contest, so it's not even an interesting question.
Yeah.
You understand.
Yes.
Again, Maurice Turner, CDT. I think the first part of the question is probably going to lean toward Ron, and the second part is for everyone else. What would it take to be able to work through the math behind using the images of the ballots in order to conduct the audit? And then on the logistics side, if that is the case, that it would actually take more work, do you think it would still be worth it to be able to use those images, even though you're technically going to be sampling a larger number compared to paper ballots, but hopefully in a slightly easier fashion?
Yeah, the use of ballot images has been proposed often. They are now available. The older machines didn't produce them, but now we have ballot images available. There's no problem in principle in making those available for public review, except for the privacy issue that Josh raised, and you have to be careful about that. From a math point of view, they don't seem to help at all, and if you aren't careful, you can even destroy the qualities you're looking for. That is to say, the ballot images themselves are not authenticated. They could have been corrupted by the software somehow. So if you want to cope with that, you would have to have a two-stage process, which says, first I compare the ballot images against the paper ballots somehow, and then I use the ballot images to do that. And the math that I've done in a light way just seems to indicate that it may just double the amount of work you have to do. So I don't see any advantages in doing that way, unless there's a public perception point of view. I mean, having the ballot images around may help with public perception of what's going on and so on too. But from the pure math point of view, they don't seem to be any help whatsoever.
We're at time, right? So all of you who didn't have a chance to ask a question, because some people just, whatever, there's a lot to talk about, please come see us, email one of us. We want to continue the conversation. Right, we didn't have 3 hours, I'm sorry. But please join me in thanking the panel.
I just want to note for the record that Ron Rivest asked me to explain risk limiting audits.